Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a complex dance, right? Three major players constantly recalculating their steps. That's pretty much what's happening right now in a really crucial part of the world. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the most intricate, uh, dynamic geopolitical relationships out there, the triangle involving the United States, China, and Pakistan. Our mission for you today is to cut through all that complexity. We want to pull out the most important insights into how their competing interests, historical ties, regional rivalries, how all that is reshaping South Asia, the Indo-Pacific, and well, global diplomacy more broadly. We've got a fascinating stack of sources to guide us, and they reveal some honestly surprising facts about how these three nations connect, sometimes aligning, sometimes clashing.
Yeah, it's more than just a dance, I'd say. It's almost like a high-stakes chess match. Every single move sends ripples across continents. And what's really crucial to grasp, I think, is how deeply historical decisions, things that happened decades ago, are still echoing in today's headlines. We're going to try and connect those dots for you so you leave this deep dive feeling, truly well-informed, ready to understand the real nuances of global power plays.
Okay, great. Let's kick things off then by looking at the relationship between the United States and Pakistan. It's been, well, a real roller coaster, hasn't it? Lots of ups and downs since the Cold War. Back in the 50s and 60s, Pakistan was actually a key U.S. ally against Soviet influence. Our sources really highlight this. The U.S. poured in military aid, economic help, diplomatic support. Pakistan even joined U.S.-led defense pacts like CETO and CENTO. They were seen as a proper frontline state.
Exactly, a frontline state. And that relationship hit another peak, didn't it, in the 1980s during the Soviet-Afghan War. Pakistan played that absolutely crucial role, basically acting as a base, a conduit, for funneling American weapons and money to the Afghan mujahideen fighting the Soviets.
Absolutely vital role back then. But it's fascinating how things changed.
Well, it's quite a swing, isn't it, from being this indispensable ally, frontline state, to then periods of, disengagement. And the implication here, I think, is how quickly a country's strategic value can just diminish once the immediate threat fades. So after the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan, U.S. attention kind of drifted, and suddenly Pakistan's facing sanctions over its nuclear program. It highlights this sort of enduring strategic scar, maybe, something that prevents a full return to that earlier level of trust, no matter what the immediate needs might seem to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then, boom, post 9/11, it was like hitting the reset button all over again. Suddenly, Islamabad is declared a major non-NATO ally. Billions of dollars start flowing in again for help in the war on terror. But, even with all that money, American officials, according to our sources, grew increasingly skeptical. There are these allegations of Pakistan playing a double game. Yeah. Sort of working with the U.S. publicly, but maybe harboring extremist elements behind the scenes.
Right, that double game narrative really took hold.
It did. And that deep mistrust, it really crystallized, didn't it, with the killing of Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, deep inside Pakistan. And crucially, without prior notice to the Pakistani authorities, our sources really point to that as a major symbolic turning point.
Right.
After that, you see this steady decline in U.S. military aid, financial assistance. The relationship really cooled.
A defining moment, for sure. And it raises that fundamental question, how does a relationship actually swing so wildly? From vital ally to deep mistrust. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really shows how, shifting geopolitical priorities can just completely reshape alliances, often really quickly, and leave behind a very complex, sometimes messy legacy.
Absolutely. So while that U.S.-Pakistan relationship has been, let's say, volatile, Pakistan's been busy cultivating another very stable, very deep strategic partnership on the other side. Let's pivot now and talk about its Iron Brothers bond with China. This has been one of the most remarkably stable partnerships out there, really since the early 1960s.
It really has. And the foundation, shared strategic interests, particularly that long-standing goal of balancing against India, that's always been central.
Definitely. Historically, China supported Pakistan in its wars with India. It even provided nuclear and missile technology that really helped Islamabad build up its own nuclear deterrent.
And that foundational aspect, the shared concern about India, is absolutely critical to understanding why this China-Pakistan bond has lasted so long. It's, a very pragmatic alliance born out of these shared geopolitical realities. But what's also really significant, I think, is how the partnership has moved beyond just military and diplomatic stuff. Now it includes this massive economic integration.
Right. That's the big shift in recent decades. This relationship has just expanded hugely, mainly through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, as everyone calls it. We're talking a flagship project of Beijing's whole Belt and Road Initiative. valued at, what, over $60 billion? It's enormous.
$60 billion. That's a staggering figure.
It is. And from China's angle, the goal seems pretty clear. Direct access to the Arabian Sea through Pakistan's Gwadar port. This cuts down their reliance on the Strait of Malacca for energy imports, which they see as vulnerable. And at the same time, it boosts Beijing's economic muscle. And frankly, it's geopolitical leverage right there in the Indian Ocean region.
Yeah, Gwadar is strategically huge for them. Access to the Arabian Sea, bypassing Malacca. That's a big deal for China's energy security and naval ambitions. And for Pakistan. Well, CPEC is often presented as this economic lifeline, right? The potential to totally transform their infrastructure, their energy sector, their trade.
Exactly. It sounds like a win-win, at least on the surface.
It does. But, given the sheer scale of that investment, over $60 billion, as you said, our sources dig into the details a bit. Are there specific terms, maybe conditions attached to these loans and projects that might disproportionately favor China? Could this lead to, long-term sovereignty concerns for Pakistan? Or maybe an unsustainable debt burden? Are they feeling that already?
That's a really important question, and yeah, the sources do raise these flags. While Pakistan definitely sees the potential transforming infrastructure, energy, trade, it has absolutely led to increased debt. That's undeniable. You hear many Pakistani economists, analysts, warning about sovereignty issues, a feeling that Chinese companies, Chinese workers are maybe dominating these CPEC projects. And there's also growing resentment in certain areas like Balochistan where the projects are concentrated. Fears about demographic shifts, about local resources being exploited. So, yeah, it's definitely not all smooth sailing.
It's a classic infrastructure for influence play, but with potentially very high stakes for the recipient country. And it highlights how CPEC isn't just an economic project, it's a powerful tool for China's expanding global influence. But it also introduces these new dynamics, these potential risks for nations like Pakistan that sign up.
Okay, so here's where the geopolitical chessboard gets even more interesting, even more complicated. How does Washington view all this? China digging in so deeply in Pakistan, especially with these massive CPEC investments. Our sources really emphasize a pretty significant policy shift, maybe subtle, but definitely there from the U.S. side.
Yeah, you can imagine Washington isn't thrilled.
Not at all. Washington clearly sees China as its main global competitor, right? So Beijing's growing influence in South Asia, that's seen as directly undermining American strategic interests in the region. And this concern has, quite naturally, led the U.S. to shift its focus, to really strengthen its partnership with India. India is now viewed as that crucial counterweight to China.
It's a classic balancing act, rivals attracting opposing alignments. And you definitely see it playing out. The U.S. and India have seriously ramped up cooperation. We're talking major defense agreements, much more intelligence sharing, joint military exercises. It's a much closer relationship than it used to be.
And then there's the Quad initiative, right? The U.S., India, Japan, Australia, that's explicitly part of this broader Indo-Pacific strategy. And the aim, let's be frank, is largely about containing China's maritime expansion, pushing back against its influence.
Exactly. The Quad is a key piece of that puzzle for the U.S. and its allies.
Okay, but think about the consequences of that. This evolving, strengthening U.S.-India partnership, it's had a very clear effect on Pakistan. It's basically pushed Pakistan even further into China's orbit. Islamabad looks at India's rising global status, its deepening ties with the U.S., and sees it as a direct threat, a threat to its own regional standing.
Understandably so, from their perspective. It fuels that security dilemma we talked about.
Right. So what does Pakistan do? It leans even more heavily on Beijing for everything: economic support, diplomatic cover, military hardware. And China, well, China is happy to oblige. It uses Pakistan as a valuable strategic hedge against India. They provide advanced military tech. We're talking fighter jets, submarines, sophisticated drones.
It's a textbook example of that security dilemma feeding itself. One side makes a move perceived as defensive, the other sees it as offensive, reacts, and the cycle continues, pushing them further apart and closer to their respective partners. And you mentioned diplomatic cover that's often overlooked, but it's incredibly important. China provides crucial political support for Pakistan on the world stage. Places like the UN Security Council or the Financial Action Task Force, the FATF, which deals with terrorism financing. China often acts as a shield, helping Pakistan deflect international pressure on sensitive issues like terrorism or human rights. That kind of backing is invaluable for Islamabad.
It really is.
Yeah, but
this increasing dependence on China, it comes with significant risks for Pakistan itself. We touched on the debt issue. So what does this all really mean for Islamabad's future? Many Pakistani economists, analysts, they're genuinely worried. They warn about a potential debt trap.
Hmm.
They draw these uncomfortable parallels to what happened in Sri Lanka, remember, with the Hambantota port deal, where Sri Lanka eventually had to hand over the port to China on a long lease because it couldn't pay the debt.
Yeah, the Hambantota example hangs heavy over these kinds of deals. It's a cautionary tale.
Absolutely. So the long-term implications for Pakistan's sovereignty, its financial health, they look quite stark if things go wrong.
It's truly a tightrope walk for Pakistan, isn't it? How do you balance getting that immediate, much-needed economic boost with maintaining your long-term strategic autonomy, your independence? And despite all the official talk, the public narrative of Iron Brotherhood, our sources suggest there is growing unease, actually, among ordinary Pakistanis. Concerns about the actual terms of these Chinese investments, the lack of transparency surrounding the deals, the environmental impact of some of these huge CPEC projects. It's a very delicate balancing act, trying to leverage a vital economic lifeline without, potentially compromising your future options or getting too deeply indebted.
And flipping back to the U.S. perspective for a moment, Pakistan just remains this deep paradox for Washington. On one hand, look, it's a nuclear-armed state. Its location is incredibly strategic, bordering Afghanistan, Iran, China, India. You can't ignore it. But on the other hand, it's often seen in D.C. as, well, a source of instability, sometimes extremism, and frankly, not always a reliable partner.
Yeah, that unreliability perception, fair or not, has really plagued the relationship, especially since 9/11.
So the U.S. strategy seems to be this kind of mix, right? A bit of pressure, a bit of engagement. They cut military aid sometimes. They sanction individuals linked to terror groups. But they also try to maintain some level of dialogue, some cooperation on specific issues.
Because the strategic dilemma for Washington is just so clear, if they disengage completely, they risk pushing Pakistan even further and faster into China's arms. That's not ideal. But if they're too accommodating, if they rely too heavily on Pakistan or keep pouring in aid without conditions, they risk, rewarding behavior they don't approve of. It's like trying to navigate this really narrow corridor, as you said. Either wall you bump into could lead to pretty bad unintended consequences.
And it gets even more complicated. Beyond the economics and the diplomacy, there's another layer that worries the U.S. reports of an increasing Chinese military presence in Pakistan. We're seeing satellite imagery, intelligence reports suggesting China might be helping Pakistan build up naval facilities at Gwadar Port, facilities that could potentially host Chinese submarines, maybe even surface ships, down the line.
Now that, if confirmed, would be a genuine game changer for the whole regional naval balance. It directly challenges the U.S. Navy's longstanding dominance in the Indian Ocean. For Washington and for allies like India, it's frankly a strategic nightmare scenario. Think about it. A potent China-Pakistan military nexus right there on India's western flank and also very close to the Strait of Hormuz, that critical oil choke point. That represents a really significant shift in power projection capabilities for China.
A huge potential shift.
Right.
And adding yet another layer of concern onto all of this is Pakistan's own domestic instability. It's a constant background worry. You've got recurring economic crises, crippling inflation, intense political polarization, infighting, and worryingly, the resurgence of extremist groups like the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP. All of this threatens to destabilize the country from within.
Which is incredibly dangerous because a severely weakened, unstable Pakistan could easily become, once again, a breeding ground for transnational terrorism. That's a direct threat not just to the region, but potentially globally. It also raises the risk of conflict with India, another potential flashpoint.
Exactly. And this is where you see how domestic problems in one country become major international security concerns. For both the U.S. and China, believe it or not, the internal health of Pakistan actually matters a great deal. It directly impacts their own regional strategies.
That's right. It's not just an internal affair for Pakistan. China tries to manage it by providing infrastructure, maybe some debt relief, trying to keep things stable enough for CPEC, while the U.S. traditionally has offered things like IMF-backed financial rescue packages, trying to prevent a total economic collapse, plus diplomatic cover sometimes. So the competition for influence in Pakistan isn't just about building ports or power plants. It's also this kind of underlying battle for managing Pakistan's future stability, its entire trajectory.
Yeah, it really shows that geopolitical stability, at the end of the day, isn't just about military strength or alliances. It's also deeply rooted in economic health, social cohesion, political stability. All that domestic stuff matters hugely on the world stage.
Absolutely. Economic resilience, social resilience, they are fundamental components of national power and stability in the modern world.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean for the future? This whole U.S.-China-Pakistan triangle. It's clearly not static. It's constantly shifting. You can imagine how the coming years might see some kind of recalibration, maybe changes in leadership in any of these countries, shifts in military doctrine, big global economic shocks. Think about how a major crisis somewhere else, say in Taiwan, or another conflict erupting in the Middle East, or even renewed instability in Afghanistan, how any of those could act as a trigger, reshaping this entire three-way dynamic.
Definitely. Looking ahead, this interplay among the US, China, and Pakistan is only going to continue evolving, and likely with, I'd say, increasing intensity. As the US really doubles down on its global competition with China, economically, militarily, technologically, South Asia is inevitably going to become an even more critical arena for that rivalry. And Pakistan. It's caught right in the middle. It will have to navigate this great power competition with extreme caution very carefully. Now, its strategic location, that definitely gives it leverage. It always has.
All right.
Its growing dependence on China, especially economically, coupled with those frayed ties with the U.S., that could severely limit its options, its ability to act truly autonomously.
It really puts them in a bind.
It does, and it brings us back to that fundamental challenge we discussed. How does any nation caught in such crosscurrents balance its immediate geopolitical realities, its need for security, for economic support, with its longer-term aspirations for sovereignty, for independence, in what's clearly becoming a much more polarized world?
That is the core question, isn't it? Okay, so as you, our listeners, reflect on this deep dive, here's something to chew on. In this era of intensifying global competition, how many other countries, maybe nations historically aligned one way or another, might find themselves walking similar tightropes, trying to balance their survival, their economic needs, with their national sovereignty? What signs, what indicators would you look for to predict which nations might face such dilemmas next? Something to think about.